Daughter of Sorrows by Emily Jones. Part 1. The Awakening. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Psalms 27:10. Chapter 1. An Unfortunate Fate. Ildriana, Broken, 796 BB. Empty. Why was life so empty? Is there no meaning at all? Does kindness and goodness mean nothing? I sighed, and my head slumped forward defeated. I faintly remembered the stories my father once told me as a little girl. Stories of gods and goddesses who intervened in the affairs of men, and of heroes who saved young maidens from fates worse than death. Yet, no hero would save my life, and no such god existed who might intervene in my future. I once dreamed that a hero would come into my life and save me, that I could live happily ever after. This hope had long since withered, and today what remains burns to ashes. I must face my path alone. I sighed, stood, and dusted sand from my skirts. Alone or not, help or no help, my father and the village would not be kept waiting on my account. I slowly, carefully made my way up the steep incline leading to the village, keeping a wary eye out for any creatures that might be lurking about. Eventually I made it back to the path that led to my father's home. Loud clanging met my ears, but it barely registered as I walked past the shop towards the front step of the lodge. Sudden silence filled the air, and I tensed and glanced weirdly towards the door. My heart began to pound as a roar exploded from near the forge. Stinson must have misplaced his strike and deformed another shoe. Pity for the young man broke my heart as my father's verbal lashing grew to an octave that Stinson and I recognized all too well. Fear and common sense quickly overpowered my pity, and I quickened my pace towards the house. I had barely latched the door when I faintly heard the first strike coming through the dense oak panel. I shuddered and leaned against the door, wishing that it would stop. But there was nothing I could do. Stinson was bound to my father until his 24th birthday. Until then, in the eyes of our people, it was up to my father to decide on a just punishment for his failure. Should I intervene in his judgment, my father would only dismiss my concerns as the worthless convictions resulting from one too many stories about the gods as a child. How many times had he told me that they were just stories written by weak men and fanciful women who could not cope with the trials of their life? Perhaps he was right. This was just the way it was. Besides, I had enough to worry about. I pushed myself from the door and went to prepare myself for my fate. My father had come in after what felt like an eternity. His anger had cooled, yet the faint bruises on his freshly washed knuckles testified of the episode. Not a word was spoken between us as he went behind the divider to prepare for our meeting. I stared down numbly at my hands, waiting. My father emerged from behind the divider wearing a clean tunic. He stood there for a moment and looked me up and down, hesitating. For a moment I saw a hint of concern enter his eyes before he pressed his lips together and nodded towards the door. I stood and slowly followed his lead. Based on his expression, I knew he too was uneasy about what the elders were intending to ask of him. Our situation was an uncommon one. Ordinarily, I would have been married off by now, and the elders would have left us be. Unfortunately, the many hours I had spent in my father's forge discouraged the attention of any who might have attempted to claim me. Between my father's temper and the flames, most men could not stand to be in the shop for more than a few moments at a time. Even then, they were silent, spoke only to father, and ignored my presence. If it were not for the laws of our people, I doubt even Stinson would choose to share a forge with the ornery man. I glanced over at my father and wondered if he regretted not remarrying so that he could have had a son. If he had done so, there would have been no need for me to have stayed in the shop to complete the tasks he and Stinson were too busy to complete themselves. Even a young lad of 6 or 7 could refill the water barrels, organize his tools, and sweep the shop. Then, perhaps, I could have had the chance to find a suitable match for myself, and we would not have been here today. Alas, my father did no such thing, and wishing things were different would not change the past. We rounded a bend in the path, and the village meeting house came into view. My gut tightened. This was it. No amount of dawdling could put off this meeting any more. I licked my lips, nervously, straightened my posture, and lifted my chin. I would not go into this meeting looking like prey to be devoured. After all, the elders did not specify why I was asked to come. Maybe, Hopefully, they were simply in need of a maiden to tend to one of their daughters. But of course, that would be highly unlikely. If one of the elders' daughters needed a companion, they would have chosen someone more suitable. No, this was just wishful thinking. My father opened the door and stepped in before me. He offered a brief nod to each of the 5 elders present, before gently setting his bruised hand upon my shoulder and guiding me to a seat. Glenn, the chief elder, stood slowly and offered a faint smile. "I'm glad to see you here, Isaac. I'm certain you're wondering why we've called you here today." "I have my suspicions," my father growled, making it quite clear he was not pleased to be here. "You needn't sound so angry, Isaac. We're doing you a favor, after all. You should have performed your duty to the village long ago." Auburn called out in an irritatingly mocking tone, a near sneer marking his narrow face. "My duty? What duty is that? I keep our people well supplied with my ironworks. Tell me, what farmer is short a tool or warrior a sword? None. I have done my duty to its fullest." My father's temper flared defiantly. I silently closed my eyes and wondered whether to hope Auburn would stop foolishly provoking my father, or whether to hope my father would become angry enough to refuse any suggestion the elders offered today. "My friends, we all know what a talented smith you are to our village. Nay, as soon as a problem arises, you have already begun work to mend it. Evelyn soothed. "We called you here to discuss your daughter, not your work." My father calmed slightly and lifted his chin, pleased by Evelyn's compliment. "What about my daughter?" Hondi cleared his throat. "Your daughter has reached her 21st birthday, yet she remains unwed. Is it not her duty to her clan to marry a warrior from among our people, so that our numbers may remain strong?" My father scoffed. 21 is far from an old woman. Besides, I have seen none of your sons asking after her. So what does it concern you whether she marries now or lives in my household for another 20 years? "It is our concern, because as the clan's elders, it is our responsibility to ensure that the next generations of warriors is raised. It cannot happen if the women refuse to leave their father's house." Auburn spat. My father huffed. "Well, since you are so concerned with raising up my grandchildren for me, tell me, have you found a man among our clan to father them, or do you expect me to order my daughter to grow one in her garden?" "Actually, Isaac, we do have someone in mind. Eric the tanner has asked after your daughter," Glenn responded calmly. I did not hear my father's response as ringing filled my ears and bile rose to my throat. Surely they were not serious. Tanner already had 3 wives. Did he now want another woman to beat when she failed to produce a warrior's son for him to raise? Was I to trade my father's surly words and harsh temper for another man's fists? Surely my father, for all his failings, would not condemn me to such a fate. Yet doubt crept into my mind. Eric was a highly respected warrior among our people. He is wealthy as well, so much so that I'm afraid that many men have turned a blind eye to his cruelty. After all, the men probably believed his wife brought his fury upon themselves. I fought back tears, realizing that my father just might be willing to submit me to the council's decision. The ringing in my ears faded, and my father's words broke through. "Well, I suppose there are worse suitors than Eric, I will agree." "Father!" I almost shouted, as my mind raced to come up with a way to dissuade him from this course of action without offending the elders. "Surely you know my heart. I have long since determined that I could never leave your side." As though to convey the earnesty of my words, I slid onto my knees and knelt before him, clutching his hand in mine. "You have no heir, and Stinson will not remain in your service forever. Should you permit it, I would live out my life as the care of your household. Though it is against the traditions of our people for a firstborn daughter to take this role, I cannot imagine asking you to end each day by coming home to a cold hearth and stale bread. It would be selfish for me to do so after all that you've done for me." I looked down and swallowed the lump in my throat, hoping against hope that these hastily formed words would soothe the pride of these men and convince my father to show mercy. My heart sank as the elders began to argue among themselves, clearly disturbed that I dared to attempt to disrupt their plan. Beside them, my father looked stunned that I would speak out like this. Finally, he raised a hand to silence the men and spoke. "Daughter, though I appreciate your consideration of me, I cannot allow you to become my Kia, for I will not subjugate you to a life of isolation and poverty upon my death, for you will have no brother to care for you in your old age. I believe that Eric would be a good match for you. Now this discussion is over." "Yes, father." I choked out the words as I bowed my head and fought tears. I was doomed. Chapter 2. Run. Tears fell down my face as I knelt in the rough sands. There are many kind men I could have married, maybe even loved. But Eric? Never. I would be better off alone and begging in the streets than to be wed to that monster. Why did the council have to ask this of my father? Surely one of Eric's wives would conceive a son soon. Why did he need me? Thoughts waged war within my mind, yelling and screaming for me to run far, far away, so that I need not face this life of misery. Yet my mind told me that this was a foolhardy venture. Should I flee, the warriors would track me down, and I would be either sold into slavery or killed. If I were sold, Eric, or perhaps an even crueler master, would purchase me. I could be worse off than before. No, I must beg my father one more time to allow me my freedom. It is my only hope. Upon arriving back at my doorstep, just as dusk began to set in, I saw my father's imposing silhouette looming behind the oiled hides covering our windows. I took one last steadying breath and entered the single-roomed building. As I passed through the doorway, my father's eyes quickly found me in a scowl. Why did you leave so quickly after the meeting? The elders wanted to introduce you to Eric. It was dishonorable to leave before they properly dismissed us. Fear overwhelmed me. He was not in a good mood. In this state, he would refuse my request. Surely I was doomed to a fate totally unavoidable. The tears that I tried to banish returned as I sunk to my knees hopelessly. Please do not make me do this, Father. He is cruel. All the women knows that he beats his wife and shows them no mercy. Do not send me away to such a man. Please let me— Enough, my father thundered, and I quaked. You should not listen to gossip. Eric provides well for each of his wives. He will provide for you as well. Anyone who has told you differently is just an old gossiping hen. With that, my father turned and went out to the forge. I ran my hands through my hair as emotion swirled through me. I had failed. There was nothing for me here. I was as good as dead. Swiftly, a familiar numbness filled me. A single deep breath entered my lungs as a newfound resolve found root in my mind. I pushed myself to my feet. It was better to run than submissively allow myself to become another victim of Eric's ire. I quickly moved to pack a bag of provisions. I would need some food, wine, a knife, and a skin of water. After gathering everything, I changed out of my pale green smocker and full-length tunic into the shorter tunic I wore when working with my father. Though worn, this tunic would not trip me up like my more formal one did. Once I finished preparing, I slipped into bed to wait for my father's return. Only then, I drifted off into slumber. Running quickly but quietly, I dodged through the large rocks and trees blocking my path. I had to get far enough away before anyone noticed that I had vanished. I could not, must not be caught. To do so would be a fate far worse than any other I could imagine. My father could not save me from that fate, even if he wanted to. So I ran. I ran until my skin held only one more mouthful of water. Then I ran until my throat was dry and scratchy. Then I ran until my limbs quivered and blisters both developed and burst. Still I ran on and on for fear of what would happen if I were caught. When I could run no farther, I collapsed onto my knees. Wearily, I pulled out my skin of water and drank the final sip. It was barely enough to moisten my mouth. Why couldn't my father see that to marry Eric was worse than dying? Anger coursed red hot through my veins before I sighed in defeat. Why should my father care what happens to me? I am nothing. I cannot produce an heir to carry on his name, lead an army, nor even take up his trade so that I may provide an honorable living for him in his old age. Though I knew he held a small measure of affection for me, it is no more than one could have for a cat. In the end, I'm just a worthless trinket to him. Something that is pretty to look at, but holds no lasting value or use. It is no wonder that he's so eager for someone else to take me off his hands. I sighed once again and leaned my cheek against a rock, bone-weary. Perhaps my father would show one last act of mercy and wait to report my disappearance until tomorrow evening. I yawned. I shouldn't rely on this, but I couldn't run any more without some rest. My mind and body were both utterly exhausted. Soon my heavy eyelids fell and remained shut as shallow breaths escaped my lungs. So deeply did I slumber that I did not notice the grand shadow passing over me. I felt weightless, as though I were swimming in the waters of Brie. I felt the brush of wind across my cheeks as the sea breeze found me and was tempting me to enter its dark waters. I felt a warmth around my torso, as though I was curled up by the fire on a cold winter night. I tried to open my eyes, but they were so heavy, and I felt so at ease that I couldn't find the strength. Soon, my consciousness was lost again, and I fell back into a deep slumber.